What happens when the person you built an empire with tries to erase you in a single public act of betrayal? Tonight, we delve into the story of Ilara Vance, the silent architect behind tech mogul Julian Croft's meteoric rise. At New York's most exclusive charity gala, in front of the city's power brokers and media sharks, Julian made a declaration. He stood on stage, a champagne flute in hand, and introduced his young, glamorous mistress as his wife. But he made one fatal miscalculation. He assumed the real Mrs. Croft would crumble. He forgot who she was. This isn't a story of a woman scorned. It's the story of a queen taking back her kingdom one devastatingly brilliant move at a time. Stay tuned. The silence in their Fifth Avenue penthouse was a physical entity. It had weight and texture, a cold, smooth surface like the marble floors that stretched through the cavernous space. It was a silence bought and paid for by Aethelred Dynamics Julian Croft's technology empire, a name that evoked ancient power for a company that traded in the ephemeral currency of data and algorithms. Ilara Vance, his wife of 12 years, had suggested the name, pulling it from an obscure text on Anglo-Saxon kings. Julian had loved it. He'd loved her mind once. Now that mind was a utility he took for granted, like the skyline view that glittered like a carpet of fallen stars outside their floor-to-ceiling windows. Ilara sat in the Eames chair in the corner of the vast living room, a first-edition copy of a Virginia Woolf novel resting in her lap. The book was a shield. Behind it, her mind was not on Bloomsbury, but on the micro-expressions she had catalogued from her husband over the past 6 months, the slight, almost imperceptible tightening at the corner of his eye when she entered a room unexpectedly, the way his thumb swiped left on his phone screen with a practiced, furtive speed, the new vocabulary of corporate jargon that was peppered with phrases he'd clearly borrowed from someone else, someone younger, someone more digitally native. Julian paced by the windows, his own phone pressed to his ear. He was a man sculpted by success. Custom Tom Ford. Suit, a Patek Philippe watch that was a subtle nod to his 7-figure bonus, a predatory energy that he'd once turned on the world for them, but which now felt perpetually aimed in her direction. No, Marcus. The valuation is non-negotiable, he said, his voice a low, confident growl that had charmed boards and investors alike. We're not just acquiring their hardware, we're acquiring their market position. It's a power play. Ilara didn't look up, but her focus sharpened. He was talking about the Aerion acquisition. She had spent 3 weeks doing the deep dive analysis, pulling apart their financials, their patent portfolio, and their supply chain vulnerabilities. She had flagged a critical issue, a dependency on a single-source materials provider in a politically unstable region. She had written a 12-page memo on it, advising a renegotiation of terms or a structured escrow account to mitigate the risk. They'll cave. Julian continued, oblivious to the architect of his strategy, sitting 10 feet away. We have all the leverage. He hadn't read the memo. She knew it with a certainty that was as cold and hard as the pit in her stomach. He had likely had his new assistant, the one with the impossibly white teeth and a master's in brand synergy, summarize it in 5 bullet points. Or perhaps he'd had Kimberly summarize it. Kimberly Sterling. The name itself felt like a cheap perfume. Ilara had found her Instagram profile months ago. It was a curated masterpiece of ambition. Kimberly on a yacht in Monaco. Kimberly at a gallery opening in Chelsea. Kimberly sipping an espresso at a ridiculously trendy cafe. A laptop open to a presentation with the Aethelred logo faintly visible in the background. She was a strategic communications consultant, a title as vague and meaningless as it was ubiquitous in their circle. She was also, Elara knew, the reason for the late-night calls Julian took on the terrace and the faint scent of Baccarat Rouge 540 that sometimes clung to his suits. Julian ended his call and tossed the phone onto a glass table with a sharp clack. The sound ricocheted in the quiet room. "Big night tomorrow," he said, striding over to the bar and pouring himself a whiskey. He didn't offer her one. He hadn't in a long time. The Starlight Gala. Elara said, her voice even. She finally closed her book, marking her page. "I was looking at the auction catalogue. The Matisse sketch is interesting. It's a circus." He waved a dismissive hand. "All the same people writing the same checks to feel good about themselves. Listen about tomorrow." He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, not meeting her eyes. "I think you should sit this one out." The pit in her stomach turned to ice. "Oh, I thought we were co-chairing the technology sector donations. She thought, am the one who secured the pledges from half of Silicon Valley." "Things are shifting, Elara. The brand, the image, it's all about forward momentum, youth, energy." He finally looked at her, and his gaze was appraising, as if she were a piece of furniture he was considering replacing. "Your style is classic, timeless, and that's great. But we need to project dynamism." Kimberly Sterling. She's handling our PR for the event. She thinks we need a more unified front. Unified front. The corporate euphemism was so insulting it was almost comical. He was telling her to stay home so he could bring his mistress. The audacity of it, the sheer unadulterated hubris, was breathtaking. Elara felt a strange calm descend over her. The hurt was there, a deep tectonic ache, but it was being overlaid by something else, a cold, crystalline anger. She had been a ghost in this marriage for a year, an uncredited co-author to his success story. He thought she was a part of the decor, an elegant but faded fixture. He had forgotten that she had designed the house. "I see," she said, her voice betraying nothing. "You need to project a certain image. I understand completely." He looked relieved, a flicker of surprise in his eyes that she wasn't arguing. "Exactly. Thank you for understanding, Elara. It's just business." "Of course," she said, rising from her chair with a grace he had long stopped noticing. "Everything is." She walked towards their bedroom, her back straight, her steps measured. Julian, already turning his attention back to his phone, missed the look in her eyes. It was the look of a strategist who has just seen the entire battlefield with perfect clarity. He thought he was making a power play. He had no idea that he had just handed her the opening move in a war he didn't even know was coming. Later that night, long after Julian had fallen asleep in one of the guest rooms, a habit he'd developed over the past few months, Elara sat at her vanity. She wasn't looking at her reflection. She was looking at her phone. She scrolled past the dozens of unread messages from friends and acquaintances and opened a secure encrypted messaging app. There were only 3 contacts in it. One was a private investigator she had hired 2 months prior. The second was a man named Arthur Finch, a legendary but reclusive financial journalist. The third was a woman named Evelyn Reed, the 80-year-old matriarch of one of New York's oldest and most respected philanthropic families. She typed a simple message to Evelyn. "Evelyn, my apologies for the late hour. About the gala tomorrow. I have a small surprise I'd like to announce. Will you be presenting the keynote address before the main auction as planned?" A reply came back almost instantly. "For you, my dear. I'd wrestle the microphone from the mayor himself." "What do you have in mind?" Elara smiled a slow, dangerous curve of her lips that the mirror reflected back at her. Julian wanted to project a new image. She would help him. She would give him, and all of New York, an evening of branding they would never forget. The Astoria Grand Ballroom was a cathedral of obscene wealth. Gilded Rococo plasterwork dripped from the ceiling, and chandeliers the size of small cars shed a brilliant diamond-hard light on the city's elite. The air was thick with the scent of 1,000 competing perfumes and the low hum of self-congratulation. This was the Starlight Gala for Children's Futures, an event where titans of industry and old-money scions paid $50,000 a table to publicly absolve themselves of the sins of capitalism. Julian Croft arrived with Kimberly Sterling on his arm, and a tidal wave of flashbulbs preceded them. They were a vision of modern power. Julian, in his perfectly tailored Brioni tuxedo, looked every inch the tech king. Kimberly was breathtaking in a crimson sequined gown that was less a dress and more a statement. It hugged every curve, plunged daringly at the neck, and was clearly chosen to be photographed. She laughed a little too loudly, her hand possessively on Julian's bicep, her eyes scanning the room. Not for friends, but for cameras. She was playing the part of Mrs. Croft with a ravenous, desperate energy. They made their way to the central table, where Julian was holding court with a U.S. senator and the CEO of a rival tech firm. He leaned in, his voice carrying just enough for those nearby to hear. "Senator, I'd like you to meet my wife, Kimberly," he said, beaming. "The brilliant mind behind our new philanthropic strategy." The senator, a man who had known Elara for years and had once sought her advice on tech policy, blinked in confusion. He looked from Kimberly's dazzling vacant smile to Julian, a question mark hanging in the air. But Julian's sheer confidence was a force of nature. He barreled past the awkwardness, launching into a story about a recent trip to Davos, with Kimberly nodding along as if she'd been there. The lie was so bold, so audacious, that it almost created its own reality. People were confused, whispering, but no one dared to challenge Julian Croft at the apex of his power. It was precisely at that moment of manufactured triumph that Elara Vance arrived. She did not make an entrance. She simply appeared. While Kimberly was a firework, Elara was the night sky. She wore a gown of deep midnight blue silk, a custom design by a couturier so exclusive he didn't have a label. It was deceptively simple, with a clean sculptural cut that whispered of immense expense rather than shouting it. Her only jewelry was a pair of sapphire and diamond earrings that had belonged to her grandmother, and a simple platinum band on her left hand. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon, and her face was calm, her expression serene. She radiated a stillness that was more commanding than any noise. She didn't walk towards Julian's table. Instead, she entered and paused, allowing the room to register her presence. A photographer from the Times, a veteran who recognized real power when he saw it, turned his lens from Kimberly and took a single, perfect shot of Elara, standing alone. The whispers in the room changed frequency. They went from confused speculation to sharp electric gossip. Two Mrs. Crofts. What was happening? Julian saw her. His smile faltered for a microsecond, a crack in the polished veneer. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Kimberly, following his gaze, saw Elara, and her perfectly applied smile tightened, a look of pure venom flashing in her eyes before being replaced by practiced indifference. Elara ignored them. Her gaze swept the room, and she began to move, Her first stop was not a confrontation, but a quiet conversation. She approached a table where Charles Baring, a notoriously grumpy hedge fund manager, was sitting. "Charles," she said, her voice a warm murmur, "I was so pleased to see the Baring Foundation was a lead sponsor tonight." Charles, who had been scowling at his soup, looked up. "Elara, I didn't expect to see you. Julian was just—" "Business is business," Elara said smoothly, giving him a knowing look that absolved him of any awkwardness. "But philanthropy is personal. I wanted to thank you personally for your guidance on the offshore fund structuring for the endowment. Your advice was invaluable." Charles's chest puffed out. "Just common sense, my dear. Glad someone listened?" It was a subtle dig at Julian, who had dismissed Charles's advice at a Hamptons brunch a year earlier. Next, she moved to the other side of the room, where she found Evelyn Reed, the matriarch, holding court. Evelyn's ancient eyes, as sharp as a hawk's, twinkled when she saw Elara. "There she is," Evelyn boomed her voice, carrying across the nearby tables. "The woman of the hour." Elara simply smiled and kissed her cheek. "Evelyn, you're too kind. I was just admiring the centerpiece." "Nonsense," Evelyn said, tapping her champagne glass for attention. "Everyone you all know Elara Croft, of course. What you may not know is that it was her tireless behind-the-scenes work that secured the matching grant from the Gates Foundation. Not a press release, not a photo op. Just quiet, brilliant work. The way it ought to be done." A ripple of genuine applause went through that section of the room. Julian, watching from his table, felt a prickle of unease. He had taken credit for the Gates grant in a Wall Street Journal profile. Kimberly, feeling the spotlight shift, tried to reclaim it. She stood up and walked over to a cluster of social media influencers, her crimson dress a beacon. "Isn't this event just everything?" she gushed, pulling out her phone for a selfie. "Giving back is the new luxury. You know, one of the influencers, a sharp-eyed young woman who ran a popular gossip site, looked from Kimberly to Elara and back again. "We're a little confused," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "Julian just introduced you as his wife, but that's Elara Vance. She's on the board of the museum." Kimberly's smile didn't waver. "Oh, you know Julian," she said with a practiced little laugh. "He's a visionary. He lives in the future. It was a terrible, clumsy save, and everyone knew it. The performance was starting to fray at the edges. Elara's masterstroke was her conversation with Marcus Thorne. Julian's number 2 at Aethelred, the man Julian had been on the phone with the night before. She found him near the bar, looking deeply uncomfortable. Marcus Elara said gently, "Elara, I'm sorry. I had no idea," he stammered. "There's nothing to be sorry for," she said, her gaze steady and reassuring. "Julian is making a statement. But I wanted to talk to you about another statement, the one Arion Labs is about to make when their sole supplier for cobalt defaults on their next shipment. I assume Julian shared my memo on the political instability in the region." Marcus's face went pale. "What memo?" "The 12-page risk analysis I emailed to him 3 weeks ago," Elara said calmly. "The one that advised building in a 40% price buffer and securing a secondary supplier before the acquisition. He did get that, didn't he? Because if he signed that deal on the original terms, your entire hardware division is exposed. Shareholder value could take a 9-figure hit." Marcus looked like he was going to be physically ill. He mumbled an excuse and hurried away, pulling out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. Elara had not raised her voice. She had not cried or caused a scene. She had simply walked through the room and dismantled her husband's empire, piece by piece, with the quiet, devastating power of the truth. The seeds were sown. All she had to do now was wait for the harvest. The main course, a filet mignon that cost more than most people's weekly grocery bill, was being served, but few were eating. The atmosphere in the Astoria Grand Ballroom was charged, the air humming with the unspoken tension. Julian Croft, who had started the evening as a conquering king, now looked like a man sitting on a throne of ice that was rapidly melting beneath him. He could feel the shift. The fawning admirers had been replaced by curious onlookers. The respectful deference had curdled into speculative whispers. He kept shooting furious glances across the room at Elara, who was now seated at Evelyn Reed's table, looking perfectly at ease, engaged in an animated conversation with a Nobel Prize-winning economist. She looked radiant, powerful, and utterly indifferent to him. It was this indifference that galled him the most. Kimberly, for her part, was trying desperately to shore up their crumbling narrative. She was table-hopping, laughing too hard, touching arms a little too familiarly. Her performance, which had seemed dazzling upon arrival, now looked what it was, a cheap imitation. "Julian is just so passionate about changing the world," she said to a steely-faced woman who ran a multi-billion-dollar private equity fund. "That's what I love about him. His vision is just so big." The woman, Patricia Lawford, looked at Kimberly with the detached curiosity of a biologist studying a new and particularly colorful insect. "His vision has historically been tempered by Elara's pragmatism," she said, her voice dry as a bone. "She's the one who talked him out of that disastrous social media venture 5 years ago. Saved him $500 million. I know because I was going to short the stock." Kimberly's smile faltered. She had no idea what Patricia was talking about. "Well, the future is now," she offered weakly, before retreating back to Julian's side. "These people are so stuffy," she whispered to him, her voice tight with frustration. "Just smile and look beautiful." Julian hissed back, his own smile a rigid mask. "That's your job." The public humiliation was a slow burn, a fire built with expertly placed kindling. The financial journalist Arthur Finch, a man who could smell corporate rot from a mile away, was observing the scene with undisguised glee. He'd had his eye on Ethelred for a while, sensing that its spectacular growth was fueled by unsustainable risks. He watched Marcus Thorne frantically whisper to 2 other board members, their faces grim. He saw the cold shoulder Julian received from Charles Baring. He saw the genuine warmth and respect afforded to Elara. He didn't need a press release. The story was writing itself in the body language of the most powerful people in New York. The breaking point came during the live auction. The auctioneer, a flamboyant man with a theatrical flair, was trying to whip up excitement for a week-long stay at a private villa in Tuscany. "Do I hear 200,000? He called out, his voice echoing in the suddenly quiet room. From the back, a voice called out, 100,000. And only if the plumbing has been updated since the Renaissance." A wave of laughter rippled through the ballroom. The voice belonged to Harrison Kane, a witty and notoriously sharp-tongued art dealer. He was sitting at Elara's table. The joke was clearly a shared one. It was an inside club moment, and Julian and Kimberly were on the outside. Julian, seeing his control of the evening slipping away completely, decided to force the issue. He stood up, grabbed the roving microphone from a stunned event assistant, and strode towards the stage. "Friends, colleagues." He began, his voice booming artificially through the speakers. "It's wonderful to see such generosity tonight." A hush fell over the room. This was not on the program. As we look to the future, it's important to have a partner who shares that vision. A partner who is as modern, dynamic, and forward-thinking as the world we are trying to build. He paused and gestured dramatically towards his table. And I am the luckiest man in the world to have that partner in my incredible wife, Kimberly Croft. He waited for the applause. Instead, there was a dense, uncomfortable silence. People were frozen, glancing from Julian on the stage to Kimberly, who was trying to look demure to Elara, who had not moved a muscle. Elara simply took a sip of her water, her expression unreadable. Julian faltered. The silence was his condemnation. He had overplayed his hand so spectacularly that he had managed to unite the entire room, a cutthroat collection of rivals and allies, in a moment of collective second-hand embarrassment for him. He tried to recover. Kimberly and I are pleased to announce a new initiative, the Croft Foundation for Digital Innovation, with a founding pledge of $20 million. He had expected gasps. He got a few polite, scattered claps. The amount, while substantial, felt like a desperate gambit. It was blood money to buy back his own image. As he stood there, stranded in the spotlight, the auctioneer, seeing his chance to regain control, quickly stepped in. "Thank you, Julian." A magnificent gesture. And now, before we continue with the auction, we have one final, very special announcement for the evening. I'd like to invite to the stage the woman who has been the heart and soul of this gala. For the past 5 years, the esteemed matriarch of New York philanthropy, Mrs. Evelyn Reed, Evelyn looking regal in Chanel tweed, walked slowly to the podium, leaning on a handsome mahogany cane. The applause for her was thunderous, genuine, and a stark contrast to the silence that had greeted Julian. Julian was forced to retreat to his table, his face a mask of thunderous fury. Kimberly reached for his hand, but he snatched it away. The unraveling was now complete. The lie had been told, and no one had believed it. The only thing left was for the truth to deliver the killing blow. Evelyn Reed reached the podium and adjusted the microphone, her movements as deliberate and weighted as a Supreme Court justice taking her seat. The applause that greeted her was not just polite. It was a wave of genuine, heartfelt relief. The room, thrown off balance by Julian's cringe-worthy display, was being righted by a figure of unimpeachable authority. Evelyn was old money, old power, old everything. She had seen men like Julian Croft rise and fall like the tides. She leaned into the microphone, and the entire ballroom fell silent. Even the clinking of cutlery ceased. "Thank you," she began, her voice a finely aged whiskey smooth, potent, and with a definite bite. "For 60 years I have had the privilege of attending events in this beautiful room. I have witnessed declarations of love, of war, and most frequently of spectacularly large egos." A knowing titter went through the audience. Her eyes, sharp and missing nothing, made a brief, sweeping survey of the room, managing to convey both warmth and a warning. They did not linger on Julian's table, but everyone felt the subtle chill as her gaze passed over it. "Tonight," she continued, "we gather under the banner of philanthropy. It's a wonderful word. It means literally love of humanity. A simple concept. Yet in our modern age it has become complicated. It has become entangled with branding, with marketing, with the laundering of reputations. The words were a direct hit. Julian, who had just tried to use a $20 million pledge as a reputation laundering service, felt his collar tighten. Kimberly's practiced smile was frozen on her face, a brittle, painted thing. "Legacy is not built on what you claim, Evelyn said, her voice dropping slightly, drawing the room in. It is not cemented with a press release or a well-timed photo opportunity. It is built on what you create. It is forged in the quiet hours of dedicated work, in the intellectual rigor of identifying a problem, and the courage to propose a solution, even when that solution is not the most profitable or popular one. She let that sink in. The room was full of people who understood profit. The idea of prioritizing anything else was both foreign and fascinating. For the past several years, we have celebrated a new kind of creation, the digital world, an astonishing globe-spanning architecture of connection and information built by brilliant, ambitious minds. She paused. But creation without contemplation is a dangerous thing. We have built a global village and forgotten to write any laws. We have given our children the keys to the kingdom without teaching them how to rule. We have celebrated the disruptors, but we have failed to manage the disruption. The result is a deficit, not a financial deficit, but an ethical one. The Nobel economist at Ilara's table was nodding slowly, his expression rapt. Patricia Lawford's pen was flying across a napkin. She was taking notes. This wasn't a charity speech. It was a thesis. It is my distinct honor tonight to announce the launch of an institution dedicated to addressing that deficit. An institution built not on ego but on intellect, not on branding but on a genuine love of humanity. The tension in the room was palpable. Something momentous was coming. Therefore, it is my profound pleasure to announce the formation of the Vance Institute for Digital Ethics. The name dropped into the room like a bomb wrapped in velvet. Vance. Not Croft. Ilara's maiden name. The shock was instantaneous and seismic. A collective audible gasp swept through the ballroom. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Julian looked as though he'd been shot. The blood drained from his face, leaving a sickly pale mask of utter disbelief. He turned his head slowly, mechanically, to stare at Ilara, who remained perfectly still, a serene island in a sea of chaos. Kimberly's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. The carefully constructed fantasy she had been living for the past 6 months had just been vaporized. Evelyn held up a hand for silence, a gesture of effortless command. The Vance Institute is launching with an initial endowment of $75 million. If the first announcement was a bomb, this was the shockwave. The room erupted. 75 million. It was a number that commanded respect, even in this rarefied atmosphere. It dwarfed Julian's pledge, rendering it insignificant, almost insulting. Charles Baring let out a low whistle. Arthur Finch, the journalist, was grinning like a Cheshire cat, scribbling furiously in his notepad. The story had just gone from society gossip to the front page of the financial section. This founding endowment, Evelyn announced, her voice cutting through the noise like a clarion call, comes from the private family trust of its founder. It is her own money, earned and managed with a foresight that is, I must say, quite breathtaking. The implication was clear. This was not Croft money. This was Vance power. Furthermore, Evelyn's smile was now triumphant. I am proud to announce that my own family's Reed Foundation, along with the Baring Foundation, she nodded graciously to a beaming Charles Baring, and several other key partners represented in this room tonight, have already pledged an additional $50 million in matching funds for the Institute's first 5 years of operation. $125 million. The number hung in the air, shimmering impossible. Julian Croft's world had just been revalued, and he was on the losing end of the trade. The Institute's first mandate, Evelyn declared, her voice ringing with the passion of a true believer, will be to develop and distribute an open-source K-12 curriculum on data privacy, algorithmic bias, and digital citizenship. It will be provided free of charge to any public school system in the country. It will directly address the ethical vacuum left by the very companies that have reshaped our world with little thought to the long-term consequences for our children. It was a perfectly executed maneuver. She had framed the entire tech industry, Julian's industry, as the villain, and she had just announced the hero who was riding in to save the day. Julian felt the floor drop out from under him. He was being publicly castrated, his life's work reframed as a societal poison, and the antidote was being funded and founded by the woman he had just tried to erase. And now Evelyn said, her voice softening, filled with genuine affection and pride. It is my great honor and personal joy to introduce the founder, the architect, and the visionary leader of this vital new enterprise, a woman of substance, intellect, and profound grace. Please welcome Miss Elara Vance. The standing ovation was a physical force, a roar of sound and approval that shook the crystal chandeliers. It was a release of all the evening's pent-up tension, a collective judgment, delivered on a tidal wave of applause. The room was united, not just for Elara, but against Julian. They were applauding her intelligence, her courage, and most of all, her exquisite, perfectly executed revenge. Elara rose from her seat. She walked to the stage with the same calm, unhurried grace with which she had entered the room hours earlier, a lifetime ago. She shook Evelyn's hand warmly and turned to face the audience, her audience now. She stood at the podium, a solitary, powerful figure in midnight blue, and waited with unnerving patience for the thunderous applause to die down. When she spoke, her voice was not loud, but it was perfectly modulated, filled with a quiet, resonant power that sliced through the residual buzz and commanded the absolute attention of every person in the room. "Thank you, Evelyn," she began, her voice steady. "And thank you all. For 12 years I have had the privilege of a front-row seat to the creation of the future. I have witnessed the genius, the relentless drive that has connected our world in ways we could have never imagined. It has been an education." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the sea of faces, a gaze that was direct and inclusive, yet somehow managed to make Julian feel completely and utterly invisible. But with great power, she continued, comes a profound responsibility that cannot be outsourced or delegated. For too long, the human cost of innovation has been dismissed as an externality, a line item on a balance sheet that is never reconciled. "The Vance Institute is my promise, and our promise," she said, gesturing elegantly towards Evelyn Charles and her other new partners to begin that reconciliation. "It is a promise to the next generation, that we will not just give them more powerful tools, but we will give them the wisdom and the ethical framework to wield those tools for the betterment of humanity, not just the enrichment of a few." She was poised, articulate, and fiercely intelligent. She wasn't a scorned wife getting revenge. She was a stateswoman, a founder, a force to be reckoned with, laying out a manifesto. The work is vast, but it is essential, she concluded, her voice ringing with a conviction that was impossible to doubt. "And it begins tomorrow. Thank you for being here tonight, to witness its start." She gave a small, dignified nod. She did not smile a triumphant smile. She simply radiated a serene, unshakable confidence. She turned and walked off the stage, her task complete. She did not look back at the wreckage she had created. She did not need to. The spotlight which Julian had so desperately tried to steal for his mistress was now hers. He was left in the darkness, a ghost at his own gala, sitting at a table with the ruins of his reputation, and a woman who was now very publicly and irrevocably not his wife. The real wife had not just stolen the spotlight. She had become the sun around which the entire room now revolved. Elara did not flee the ballroom. Flight was an admission of guilt, a gesture of weakness. Instead, after her speech, she descended the stage and moved with deliberate calm back to her seat next to Evelyn Reed. She became a gravitational center. People didn't rush her, but a slow, respectful orbit formed. The Nobel economist leaned over his eyes alight with intellectual fire, already debating the finer points of implementing her curriculum. Patricia Lawford, the private equity titan, gave her a crisp, approving nod from a neighboring table, a gesture that was in their world the equivalent of a sworn blood oath of allegiance. They were no longer seeing Julian Croft's wife. They were seeing a peer, a formidable one. She allowed herself 10 minutes in this new reality. 10 minutes to cement her position. She laughed at a joke from Harrison Kane, she accepted a glass of champagne, and she listened intently as Charles Baring promised to connect her with his contacts in the Department of Education. Every moment was a performance of effortless command. She never once glanced towards the table where her husband sat, a black hole of rage, sucking all the light and joy from his immediate vicinity. She could feel his stare like a physical pressure, a hot, focused beam of impotent fury. Finally, she leaned towards Evelyn and squeezed her hand. "I think I've taken up enough of your evening, my dear," she murmured. "Nonsense," Evelyn whispered back, her eyes twinkling. "This is the most fun I've had since I outbid Aristotle Onassis for that island in 73. Go. The next phase begins now." Elara rose. The room seemed to hold its breath as she began her exit. It was a master class in subtlety. She glided between the tables, a word here, a brief smile there. It was a royal progression. As she passed the table where the gossip influencer sat, the young woman simply looked up at her with wide, awestruck eyes and whispered, "Iconic." Her path did not take her near Julian. She moved towards the grand exit on the opposite side of the ballroom, a route she had planned in her mind hours before. The driver she had hired, not the company car Julian used, but a private service loyal only to her, would be waiting at the east entrance, away from the paparazzi scrum at the front. She was almost at the door when a hand grabbed her arm, not roughly, but with a desperate proprietary grip. Julian. He had crossed the entire ballroom, a crimson-clad Kimberly, trailing in his wake like a gaudy, panicked shadow. His face was a thunderous mask, his eyes burning. "Where do you think you're going?" He hissed, his voice low and venomous. Elara slowly turned her head and looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up to his face. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her look of pure, unadulterated disgust was enough. He snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned. "You planned this," he accused, his voice shaking with rage. "You set out to humiliate me." "Humiliation is a choice, Julian," she replied, her voice as cold and clear as ice water. "You made yours when you asked me to sit this one out. I simply made mine. This institute," he spat the word, "this little vanity project. Where did you get that kind of money? Did you embezzle it?" The accusation was so absurd, so revealing of his own transactional worldview, that Elara almost laughed. Kimberly, standing behind him, flinched. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a multi-vehicle pileup, completely out of her depth. Julian Elara said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, forcing him to lean in and listen, a final subtle assertion of control. You are making a scene. And you have been the star of far too many scenes tonight. Let me be very clear. My finances are my own. They always have been. You were so busy building your empire, you never bothered to look at the one I was quietly managing right beside you. She turned to leave. You're not going anywhere, he snarled, taking a step after her. We are going home. Our home. And we are going to fix this. Elara paused at the threshold of the grand doorway. She turned back, and for the first time she allowed a sliver of what looked like pity to enter her expression. There is no we anymore, Julian. There is no our home. I am going to my hotel. And you? You are going to be very, very busy tomorrow. And with that, she swept out of the ballroom, leaving him standing there, exposed and defeated, with the entire New York elite as his audience. The car ride to the Carlisle was silent. Elara leaned her head back against the cool leather and closed her eyes, the adrenaline of the evening finally beginning to recede, leaving a hollow, aching exhaustion in its wake. This wasn't a victory to be celebrated with champagne. It was a necessary amputation, painful, bloody, but essential for survival. She had secured the presidential suite weeks ago under an assumed name. Her bags, packed by a discreet service, were already in the closets. The suite was a world away from the cold, modernist glass box she had shared with Julian. It was old-world elegance, deep wood paneling, plush velvets, priceless antiques. It felt like a sanctuary, a fortress. She had just taken off the sapphire earrings and placed them on the mahogany dresser when the frantic, insistent buzz came from the suite's intercom. The front desk. Ms. Vance. I am so terribly sorry to disturb you. There is a Mr. Croft in the lobby. He is very insistent that he be allowed to come up. Elara walked over to the window. 34 floors below the lights of Manhattan glittered. A city of 8 million people, and all she felt was a profound solitude. Tell Mr. Croft, she said, her voice firm, that Ms. Vance is not receiving any visitors. If he does not leave the premises, you have my permission to call hotel security. A few moments of silence, and then a new voice on the intercom, raw and desperate. Julian had obviously grabbed the phone from the concierge. Elara, let me in. We need to talk. You can't do this. She simply pressed the button to disconnect the call. He was used to getting his way, to his voice being the one that commanded attention. The silence he was now met with would be more infuriating to him than any argument. 20 minutes later, the inevitable happened. A furious pounding on her suite door. He must have bribed or bullied his way past the front desk and elevator security. Elara took a deep breath. She walked to the door, her silk gown whispering against the floor. She did not open it. Go away, Julian, she said, her voice calm and even through the thick wood. Open this damn door. Elara, you owe me an explanation. After everything I've given you. What you've given me. Her voice was laced with a dangerous irony. You've given me late nights of worry, the scent of another woman's perfume on my clothes and public humiliation. I think we're even. That money, he roared, his voice muffled, but his rage clear. 75 million. Where did it come from? That's our money. That's Ethelred's money. It is the Vance family money. Julian, from my grandfather. The inheritance I received the year before we married, the one you called a nice little nest egg. I invested it. I grew it. While you were building Ethelred with leveraged debt and high-risk acquisitions, I was building my own fortune with discipline and foresight. I never touched $1 of our marital assets. Ask your lawyers. They'll find it's all perfectly firewalled. I made sure of it. There was a stunned silence from the other side of the door. She had just detonated his entire perception of her. He had seen her as a dependent, an elegant accessory to his success. He had never imagined she had her own arsenal, and the institute she continued pressing her advantage is not a vanity project. It's a direct response to the ethical rot at the heart of your industry. A rot you have willfully ignored. While you were chasing valuations, the world was waking up to the damage your products were causing. The Vance Institute is not an attack on you, Julian. It's simply ahead of the curve. Something you used to be. A key card rattled in the lock. Kimberly. He must have brought her with him. The door swung open. Julian stood there, his face contorted in a mask of disbelief and fury. Behind him, Kimberly. Sterling looked small and terrified, her crimson dress now looking garish and cheap in the soft lighting of the suite. You think you can just walk away? Julian advanced into the room. And what? Take half of everything I've built? Elara didn't move. On the marble-topped console table next to the door was a single and elegant navy blue folder. She picked it up. I don't want half of Ethelred, Julian. I don't want your stock options or your bonuses. I don't want this penthouse or the house in the Hamptons. All of that is tainted. It's yours. She held the folder out to him. These are the divorce papers. My lawyers drew them up last week. The terms are very simple. I am dissolving our marriage. I am reverting to my maiden name, and I am waiving any and all claims to your fortune. He stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. You're waiving it, all of it. You built your empire on the ethos of disruption, she said. Consider this my disruption of our marriage. I want nothing from you. A clean break. Julian was speechless. He was a man who understood transactions, leverage negotiations. This was something else. An absolute rejection. It was a move so powerful in its simplicity that he had no counter for it. He had come here ready for a fight over money, expecting tears and recriminations. Instead, he was being met with a level of indifference so profound it was like an erasure of his entire existence. His eyes fell on Kimberly, who was cowering by the door, and his humiliation curdled into a new targeted rage. He needed a victim. He needed someone to blame. Get out, he snarled, not at Elara, but at Kimberly. What she stammered. Julian, I said, get out, he roared, his voice cracking. This is your fault, you and your stupid PR strategy, projecting a unified front. You pushed for this, you wanted to be seen. Well, look around. Everyone saw you. They saw you for what you are, a cheap social climbing little consultant. He threw the final word at her, like an epithet. The dream died in Kimberly's eyes. The fantasy of becoming Mrs. Julian Croft of yachts and galas, and a life of effortless luxury dissolved into the cheap, sordid reality. She was a contract employee, and her contract had just been violently terminated. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. With a choked sob, she turned and fled down the hallway. Julian stood panting in the center of the magnificent suite, a deposed king in a borrowed room. He looked at Elara, a final desperate plea in his eyes. He was searching for the woman he had married, the partner who had once soothed his rages and celebrated his victories. He found no trace of her. In her place was Miss Vance. "You should go now, Julian," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "You have an emergency board meeting at 7 a.m. I hear they're very concerned about the Arion Labs acquisition. Apparently some troubling risk factors have come to light. The final blow. It wasn't just personal. It was business. She wasn't just leaving him. She was positioning herself to become his rival, or worse, his replacement." He finally took the folder from her hand, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the suite, out of her life. Elara closed the door and leaned against it, the silence of the room flooding back in. She did not cry. She did not smile. She simply stood there breathing. It was over. The marriage was a casualty, a piece of collateral damage in her fight for her own soul. Her phone buzzed on the dresser. She picked it up. 2 new messages had arrived on the secure app. The first was from Arthur Finch. Front page of the journal confirmed. "They're running the photo of you alone. They're calling it the philanthropist's coup." Need a quote for the headline. Your words. The second was from Marcus Thorne. "The board is in panic mode. They want to know your price to consult on the Arion deal. They want you to present your risk analysis at the 7 a.m. meeting. Name your terms, Elara." Any terms. Elara walked to the vast window and looked out at the city lights, which no longer seemed so lonely. They looked like a promise, a kingdom waiting. She thought for a moment, then typed her reply to Arthur Finch. The headline is, "The future is ethical. Elara Vance is building it." She had won the battle. The war for the future was just beginning. And so in the space of a single evening, the world shifted. Julian Croft's brazen act of public betrayal backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. He didn't just lose control of the narrative. He became a footnote in his own wife's triumphant story. The headlines the next day weren't about his paltry donation or his new wife. They were about Elara Vance, the brilliant, quiet strategist who stepped out of the shadows to launch one of the most significant philanthropic ventures of the decade. Her move wasn't born of simple revenge. It was a masterclass in power strategy and reclaiming one's identity. She didn't tear her husband down. She simply built her own castle so high that his looked like a shack in its shadow. What did you think of Elara's checkmate move? Was it the ultimate power play? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. A swirl of frost-laced wind hits Daniel's face the moment he steps out of his car. Black coattails flapping against the flurry of snow. The Winter Ball has been the most anticipated event of the year, a glittering palace of music, rich wines, and elite company. But for Daniel, it's another stark reminder that he's walking in alone. He steels himself determined not to let memories of the past taint his evening. Then across the ballroom's grand foyer, he catches sight of her Eleanor, his ex-wife. She isn't alone. She's holding the hands of 4 children who each carry the exact color and shape of his own eyes. The Winter Ball took place in the heart of Manhattan, at the luxurious Plaza Hotel near Central Park. Crisp December air clung to Daniel White's every breath as he made his way past doormen, who greeted him with polite nods. The swirling lights of the city reflected on the fresh snowfall, granting an almost fairy tale aura to the evening. Inside, the hotel's lobby dazzled with poinsettias, golden wreaths, and artful Christmas trees. The florid notes of a string quartet wafted through the corridor, luring him toward the grand ballroom. Daniel, 37 years old, had always been considered dashing. Tall with a chiseled jaw and haunted green eyes, he moved with a confident grace that came less from ego and more from an innate sense of self. Yet tonight, an uninvited pang of loneliness gripped his heart. Attending the ball alone was never his plan. Just a year ago, he had imagined standing here with his wife Elena on his arm, both of them in elegantly tailored outfits, exchanging polite smiles with Manhattan's elite, forging connections for their philanthropic endeavors. But life had taken a brutal turn. He and Elena parted ways under painful circumstances that still felt raw. Despite the veneer of normalcy, he attempted to wear Tom Ford suit perfectly, knotted tie, polished demeanor. Daniel felt like an open wound in the midst of a glittering crowd. Every decoration, every swirl of laughter, every passing perfume reminded him of the life he had lost. He tried to distract himself by thinking of small talk about his work at Harrington and White Investments, about the latest Wall Street Journal headlines about the real estate deals the firm had lined up. He thought of the people he might meet tonight. Potential clients, old friends, distant acquaintances like Teresa Wilson from his days at Yale, and donors who might support his cherished cause, the foundation he'd created in honor of his late father to fund scholarships for underprivileged kids. The grand double doors to the ballroom stood open, revealing a dazzling space, sparkling chandeliers, marble floors, and swirling couples in formal attire. As Daniel stepped across the threshold, he felt both an unsettling excitement and a sense of dread. Somewhere in this crowd, there could be a face from the past. Elena's face, perhaps, but in the swirl of suits and gowns, he couldn't immediately see her. He exhaled slowly, reminding himself that this evening was meant to be a fresh start, or at least a test of his ability to move on. After all, Elena had carved her own path, seemingly uninterested in the shared dreams they'd once built. He clenched his fists in his pockets. This night is for me, he thought. I'm going to enjoy myself, come what may. Daniel's mind drifted back to the day he first met Elena. It was during a summer internship at a hedge fund in Boston, back when they were both wide-eyed graduate students. She was bold, brilliant, and carried an aura of mystery that captivated him. Elena's luscious dark hair framed her olive complexion, and her deep brown eyes flashed with ambition. She had come from a modest background in Montreux, Switzerland, and her accent, along with her fierce determination, made her stand out among the crowd of interns. Their attraction was instant, fueled by late-night strategy sessions and stolen glances at coffee breaks. By the end of the internship, they'd begun a relationship that seemed as bright and promising as their future careers. Within 2 years after they'd finished graduate school, he at Yale, she at Columbia, they married in a private ceremony officiated at a small chapel in upstate New York. His mother, Carol White, and her father, André de la Montagne, blessed the union with tears of joy. Yet as they built their careers, cracks began to form. Both were ambitious. Both wanted the best for themselves, and ironically, that drive which once unified them started to push them apart. Eleanor felt stifled by the conventional life Daniel seemed to desire, a suburban home, dinner parties, early nights. Meanwhile, Daniel struggled to keep up with Eleanor's relentless push for success and adventure. She took job opportunities in Hong Kong and Zurich, while Daniel remained in New York to care for his ailing father and to stabilize his fledgling investment firm, Harrington and White, which he co-founded with his best friend from college, James Harrington. Long, silent months apart replaced the passion they once shared. Emails and texts became the main medium of communication. The final blow came when his father passed away, and Elena didn't show up to the funeral. She was stuck in a negotiation in Shanghai, or so she claimed. Daniel never forgave her for that. The day after the funeral, he filed for divorce. The year since the divorce was granted felt like a haze of regrets and half-hearted attempts to move forward. Daniel's mother tried to console him. James Harrington tried to bury him in work, hoping he'd forget his heartbreak in corporate success. But the hurt ran deep. He wasn't just losing Elena. He was losing the idea of the family he had so desperately wanted to build, the stability he had vowed to create, a vow that was broken. Little did he know that this fateful night at the winter ball would unravel secrets that would cut deeper than he ever imagined. A month ago, Daniel had almost declined the invitation to the winter ball. The event, hosted annually by New York's philanthropic circle, was a magnet for the richest and most influential personalities. It was a chance to mingle, to raise money for various causes, and to flash power and status. Harrington and White had been a chief sponsor for the past 3 years. Daniel James Harrington had told him, "We can't skip it. Our firm's entire public relations campaign is anchored on us being present front and center. This is how we attract high-profile clients." Daniel, sitting behind his mahogany desk, stared at the invitation's gold-trimmed edges. The bold lettering read, "Winter Ball, an evening of giving and glamour." He sighed. "I just don't feel up to it, James." His partner, a tall man with sandy hair and an unrelenting optimism, placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Look, I know you've been through a rough patch, but it's time to step out there again. If you don't, you'll never move on." Daniel had half a mind to crumple the invitation. Memories of attending this event with Eleanor the previous year, dressed in matching midnight blue ensembles, dancing under the chandelier, celebrating the expansion of their philanthropic network, still haunted him. Back then, the final stage of divorce was looming, even if they pretended all was well in front of the cameras. But James had a point. Daniel's philanthropic foundation needed exposure, and the firm needed him to show that he was still the confident leader they all relied on. Perhaps the winter ball could mark a turning point, a chance to re-enter society with his head held high. After all, what were the odds Elena would be there? She'd been traveling the world, seemingly unconcerned with the philanthropic circuit in New York. Reluctantly, he wrote out his acceptance, sealed the envelope, and sent it back. The next day, he forwarded his measurements to his tailor for a new suit, an outward sign that he intended to move forward, even if his heart still lagged behind. The clink of champagne glasses and the resonant echoes of string instruments filled the grand ballroom. Women in sweeping satin gowns floated on the arms of men in crisp tuxedos. A faint scent of pine from the holiday decorations mixed with the sweet aroma of desserts placed at the buffet table. Daniel tried to relax by the refreshment station, swirling a glass of sparkling water. He was never one for too much alcohol, especially not when he needed to keep his wits about him. Around him, clusters of socialites murmured gossip and speculation. Teresa Wilson, a college acquaintance now working for the New York Times, offered him a polite nod from across the room. He returned the gesture, but avoided prolonged eye contact, not in the mood for an in-depth conversation. His eyes scanned the dancing couples, the swirl of color and elegance. Usually he'd find it all mesmerizing. The soft glow of chandeliers overhead, the confident laugh of donors proud to share their wealth, the swirl of philanthropic ambition that actually did some good in the world. But tonight, an uneasy tension weighed on him. Something about the air felt thick, as though the energy in the room was brimming with revelations waiting to be spilled. He stepped away from the crowd, weaving through elegantly dressed men and women. A group of corporate bankers from Goldman Sachs tried to engage him in talk about the stock market's recent fluctuations. Another small cluster from a tech startup pitched their new app. He feigned interest, made a few polite remarks, but found himself inching toward the corner of the room where a sense of quiet serenity reigned, just as he took a seat at a small table beside a pillar draped in silver garlands. His gaze drifted over the dance floor and froze. The murmuring crowd seemed to blur. The music dulled, as if his senses had zeroed in on a single figure. There, standing at the top of the ballroom's ornate staircase, was Elena. She wore a wine-red gown that accentuated her lithe form, her dark hair cascading in loose waves over her shoulders. A hush seemed to envelop him, like a wind had swept through his chest. After all these months, it still felt unreal to see her in person. It wasn't just Elena's presence that paralyzed him. At her sides stood 4 small figures. Children. 2 girls and 2 boys, each no older than 5 or 6. And in the gleam of the chandelier's light, Daniel noticed the most striking detail. Each child's eyes were the same luminous green as his own. His mind reeled. This had to be some sort of trick of the light. It couldn't be. But as Elena stepped forward, guiding them gently down the staircase, the resemblance became even clearer. 4 children with the same color and shape of eyes as Daniel White. A jolt of disbelief electrified his veins. He'd never heard Elena mention children after they split. He hadn't heard a whisper from mutual acquaintances. And now, out of nowhere, these 4 kids appeared, each bearing his most distinctive feature. The glass in his hand trembled. The lively chatter of the ball receded to a low hum. All he could do was watch, transfixed, as Elena and those children moved further into the throng of people, heading unerringly in his direction. Daniel rose slowly, heart pounding. If Elena saw him, she gave no outward sign. She turned to exchange pleasantries with a member of the philanthropic committee, her polite smile carefully in place. The children clung to her hands, one of the little girls glancing shyly around the room. Up close, the resemblance was even more impossible to deny. Each child had inherited the green eyes that were so distinctive in Daniel's family. Each had some subtle aspect of his facial structure, a dimple on the cheek, the angular tilt of the jaw, the gentle curve of the nose. He approached his steps, halting uncertain how to break the barrier of polite society that kept them separated. A swirl of dancers momentarily blocked his path. By the time he emerged into an opening, Eleanor was there, mere feet away, her expression unreadable. "Hello, Daniel," she said quietly. Even amidst the swirl of music and conversation, her voice carried to him, as though they were the only 2 people in the room. Her accent seemed a touch more pronounced than usual, or perhaps he was just hyper-aware of every detail in this moment. He swallowed, noticing the children shift uncomfortably behind her. "Elena," he managed, forcing out the word. Another breath. "I didn't know you'd be here." Her eyes flickered. The invitation came through an old contact. And, well, I wanted to support the cause. Also, I thought it might be time. "Time," he repeated. He let the word linger, casting a glance at the children, who were now standing awkwardly, clearly unsure of what was happening between the grown-ups. Time for what? She hesitated, and her gaze fell to the floor. Then, drawing in a soft breath, she said, "Time for you to meet someone." Turning, she placed a gentle hand on each child's shoulder. "Mon chéri," she whispered to the boy on her right. "This is Daniel. He's an old friend of mine." Daniel's heart twisted. Just an old friend? The boy looked up, wide-eyed, and offered a polite greeting. The rest followed suit, each voice small but distinct. 2 girls, 2 boys all in a line. His mind whirled. He couldn't form the words to ask the burning question, the question that screamed for an answer. Instead, he forced a cordial smile. "How do you do?" "We're fine," replied the eldest boy, whose hair was chestnut, just like Daniel's was as a child. "My name's Sebastian." The others introduced themselves, Madeline, Florence, and Thomas. The mention of their names hammered in the reality of their existence. Daniel extended his hand tentatively, and each child shook it with a curious, polite manner that seemed unusual for their ages. At last he turned to Elena with an expression that must have pleaded for some kind of explanation. She read it clearly. "Daniel," she said in a low tone, "I didn't plan on bringing them here to shock you. But I thought maybe this was the right time to tell you the truth." A tumult of anger, confusion, and heartbreak welled up in him. He glanced around, mindful of the many guests who might be watching. "Perhaps we should talk somewhere private." She nodded. "Yes, let's go to the side lounge. The children can stay with my nanny for a moment." She turned and beckoned a woman standing discreetly by the door, who hurried over and led the children away. A dull roar filled Daniel's ears as he and Elena glided along the perimeter of the ballroom. Guests parted to let them pass, and in their curious eyes, Daniel caught glimmers of speculation. Once they reached the smaller adjacent lounge, an ornate room with plush armchairs and soft lighting, they stepped inside and shut the door. The silence in the lounge was suffocating. Elena stood by a fireplace, golden light flickering against her dress. Daniel remained near the door, as though unsure whether to enter fully or bolt. Finally, she motioned him closer. His voice, when it emerged, trembled with barely contained emotion. Are they mine?" Elena studied him, eyes glistening. "Yes," she said, softly. "They are your children." The words struck Daniel like a physical blow. He staggered backward, pressing a hand against the door for support. For a moment it felt as though the world had inverted. The walls closed in his breath, caught in his chest. He tried to reconcile the reality of what he'd just heard with the life he'd been living alone, believing fatherhood was a dream that died when his marriage ended. How? Why? He struggled for coherent words. A dozen questions fought for priority in his mind. Why wouldn't you tell me? Why 4 children? Elena. Tears welled in her eyes, and she clasped her hands together, the diamond bracelet on her wrist glinting in the firelight. It's complicated, Daniel. I was pregnant when the divorce became final. I discovered I was carrying twins at first. But there was more to it. It was a complicated pregnancy that I had to keep under the care of a specialized clinic in Geneva. She paused, swallowing hard. I couldn't bring myself to tell you. We were both so angry, so hurt. And after the funeral of your father, I felt like there was no place for me in your life. No place for my burdens. Burdens, he snapped, voice rising. They're children, Eleanor. Our children. You denied me the chance to be a father. She flinched. I know. I was selfish. I was scared. My father convinced me it might be better this way. He wanted me back in Switzerland, away from the complexities of our relationship. A pounding ache built behind Daniel's eyes, half fury, half heartbreak. He remembered Elena's father, André de la Montagne, proud, aristocratic, always disapproving of Daniel's American roots. But 4 of them. Elena, how old are they? She let out a trembling sigh. Sebastian and Madeline are 6. Florence and Thomas are 5. Yes, I was already pregnant once before the divorce process, and it was a complicated timeline. I found out I was expecting Florence and Thomas much later. The pregnancies were nearly back-to-back. I kept it hidden under the chaos of traveling, and I found ways to manage without letting you know. Daniel closed his eyes, waves of disbelief washing over him. For all this time, you never once sent me a clue. Never told me you'd had them. Tears slipped down Eleanor's cheeks. I wanted to multiple times, but each time I gathered the courage, something stopped me. Your mother's health issues, the business expansions, and your anger. We left things so bitterly. I thought I could protect the children by keeping them away from a toxic environment. She shook her head. I see now. That was a mistake. Mistake. He barked a humorless laugh. It's so much more than that. Elena, you've robbed me of 6 years of fatherhood. I could have known them, raised them. She lowered her head. I'll never be able to make that up to you or to them, but I can try to fix it now if you'll let me. Daniel sank into an armchair, his limbs numb. This revelation turned his world inside out. For so long he'd thought fatherhood was an unreachable horizon, especially after the divorce. Now he had children, 4 living, breathing children who bore his eyes, his features, his lineage. He wanted to hate Eleanor, to rage at her for this injustice. But a quiet voice in his heart reminded him of how he'd once loved her, how complicated their parting had been. You should have told me, he whispered, pressing his palms to his eyes. I would have been there, no matter what was going on between us. That's a choice you made for both of us, and it wasn't yours to make alone. Elena knelt before him, voice quivering. I know. I'm sorry, Daniel. Please let's talk about how to move forward for the children's sake, if nothing else. He looked at her, seeing the raw fear and regret. In the space of a single evening, everything had changed, and he had no idea how to proceed in a way that would heal 6 years of damage. Overcome by the shock of Eleanor's confession, Daniel found his mind spiraling back in time. He remembered the bitter arguments that had led to their divorce, how his father's terminal illness put pressure on him to stay in New York, how Eliana, with her unstoppable career drive, had accepted an offer in Shanghai, simultaneously bristling at Daniel's pleas for her to return. He recalled the day he discovered the plane tickets she'd booked not just for business, but for a possible permanent move overseas. The day he confronted her, they both said things they could never take back. You'll never be satisfied with who I am, he'd accused. You don't want a partner, you want a trophy wife. She retorted, eyes blazing. They parted ways, each convinced the other was irredeemable. And in the swirl of attorneys and court proceedings, each attempted to carve out a future free from the other's disappointment. When the divorce finalized, Daniel had felt strangely numb, as if a piece of him had died. He sought solace in building Harrington and White into a powerhouse, throwing himself into philanthropic work, perhaps to fill the void left by the breakdown of his personal life. Now discovering Elena had been pregnant at the time, or just shortly thereafter, turned all his assumptions into lies. He remembered every phone call they missed, every email they'd let go unanswered. They had been so consumed by pride that neither had paused to consider the bigger picture, that there might be unborn children deserving of unity and love. In the quiet lounge, Elena was still kneeling by his chair, eyes rimmed with tears. The faint sound of the Winter Ball's orchestra drifted in from beyond the door, an incongruous soundtrack to their shattering revelation. He said softly, I need to know everything, Elena. No more secrets? She nodded, standing and moving to the window where she looked out over the city lights. I found out I was pregnant with Sebastian and Madeline about 4 months before we filed for divorce. But we were in the midst of the biggest fight of our lives. I was traveling for work. I felt alone, and my father persuaded me to stay quiet until I could come home to Switzerland. He never liked you, Daniel, and he wanted me to raise the children by myself. She turned to him, voice trembling. But then I realized I was expecting again Florence and Thomas shortly after the birth of the twins. The pregnancies were a medical miracle and complication. The doctors told me the second was an unusual overlapping pregnancy, extremely rare. I was terrified. I didn't know if I'd survive. There were complications. I was hospitalized for months in Geneva. During that time, my father kept everything hidden from the outside world. I was too weak to fight him. Daniel listened, each word burning into his soul. He envisioned Elena alone in a Swiss clinic battling a perilous pregnancy, while he, thousands of miles away, cursed her name for not being present in his life. A complicated swirl of sorrow, pity, and anger gripped him. And after the births, you just never thought it important enough to pick up the phone. Her eyes flashed with regret. I was scared. I was told you'd moved on, that you resented me. And in truth, I was ashamed for deceiving you. Yes, I let pride and fear dictate my actions. I thought maybe if I raised them alone, I could avoid all that heartbreak, all that anger. But it's been a burden on my conscience, especially as the children have grown and started asking questions about their father. Daniel closed his eyes, taking a moment to let her words settle. He pictured 4 children in a Swiss estate, asking, "Where's Daddy?" and receiving no real answers. The heartbreak coiled tighter in his chest. With trembling conviction, he rose to his feet. I have to meet them properly. They need to know who I am. Elena moved to open the door. Of course. They're just next door with the nanny. Let's go. Stepping into the side corridor, Daniel felt the warm overhead lights shining down on him with an almost glaring intensity. The sweet, festive music in the background felt surreal. He was about to meet his children for the first time in the midst of a glittering winter ball. In a small antechamber, the 4 children sat in a circle with their nanny, a petite woman named Dominique, who was reading them a story to keep them occupied. As soon as Elena and Daniel entered, the children looked up, their wide green eyes fixed on Daniel. Madeline, the older girl, peered at him with curiosity. "You look like me," she said quietly, as if discovering something extraordinary. Daniel knelt, feeling tears prick at his eyes. "I guess we do look alike," he replied. Sebastian, the older boy, placed his hands on his hips with a surprising note of confidence. "Maman says you're very important in New York. Are you a prince or something?" Daniel couldn't help a small smile. "No, I'm not a prince. I just help run a company. And I do some work helping others." Florence, a shy girl, nestled closer to her nanny. "Are you a good man?" she asked, her voice small. The question speared Daniel's heart. He glanced at Elena, who was silently watching, tears shimmering on her lashes. Carefully he answered, "I try to be. I'm not always perfect, but I do my best." Thomas, the youngest, touched Daniel's tie. "I like your tie," he said, smiling. Elena knelt beside Daniel, resting a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Kids, I want you to know that Daniel is someone very important to me, and to you." She paused, her gaze flickering to Daniel. "He's your father." The words settled over the room. There was no thunderous reaction, No immediate meltdown, but rather a kind of hushed awe. Madeline was the first to speak again. "That means you love us." Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat. "More than I can say. Even though we're just meeting, I already feel that you're the most precious gift I could have." Sebastian studied Daniel with a pensive look. "Then why didn't you come see us before?" A flash of guilt twisted inside Daniel, though the fault wasn't truly his. But how could he explain that? He glanced at Elena, who placed a gentle hand on Sebastian's shoulder. "That's my fault," she said. "I didn't tell him where we were. Sometimes adults make mistakes." Her admission left the children quiet. They seemed to accept it with a resilience that only children possess. Slowly, Thomas reached up and touched Daniel's hair, as if to confirm he was real. Daniel felt his heart break and mend all at once. He opened his arms hesitantly, offering an embrace. One by one, the children stepped forward. Madeline first, then Sebastian, then the others. Their small arms wrapped around him, and for a moment he closed his eyes, letting the warmth of their presence wash over him. He didn't notice the tall figure standing in the corridor until someone cleared his throat. Daniel looked up to see James Harrington, his business partner and longtime friend, wearing an expression of utter shock. Daniel James said, struggling for composure, I've been looking for you, but I see you're preoccupied." His eyes roved over the 4 children. "Are these?" Daniel nodded, still holding on to the children. "Yes." "Mine." James stood there, mouth slightly open. But he rallied quickly, offering a small, congratulatory nod. "I see. Well, I'll leave you to your reunion." He turned to go, then paused, giving Daniel a pointed look that seemed to say, "We need to talk." Daniel knew with a sinking feeling that his entire life, personal and professional, had just undergone a seismic shift. Everything from finances to living arrangements to his carefully curated public image would change once it became public knowledge that he had 4 children he'd never mentioned. And in his mind, he couldn't help wondering if more secrets were lurking behind Elena's sudden reappearance. Later that evening, after ensuring the children were settled in a quiet corner, with Dominique, Danielle, and Elena slipped away to find more privacy. They went up a short flight of stairs, ending up on a balcony overlooking the ballroom floor. Below them, the party continued in full swing, glittering gowns, twinkling lights, the hum of polite conversation. He stared down at the swirling crowd, then turned to Elena. "This is a lot to take in, Elena. Are you certain no uncertainties about their paternity?" She flinched at the question. "They're yours, Daniel. I swear it on everything I hold dear." His face softened. "I want to believe you. But you have to understand my perspective. You hid them from me for 6 years. Her cheeks turned pink. "I understand. If you want a paternity test, I won't stop you. Anything to give you peace of mind." He nodded, feeling a pang of guilt for doubting her. "I'm sorry. It's just, this is so unexpected." She waved off the apology with a trembling hand. "I deserve your suspicion, but I have no reason to lie now. My father, he urged me to cut you out of our lives entirely. He was never going to let you know about them. But they kept asking. They wanted to know why they didn't have a daddy like other children. And as they grew older, their resemblance to you grew more obvious." A wave of anger coursed through Daniel. "Your father, he's the one who convinced you to hide them from me." She shook her head. "I let him. I was emotionally weak, recovering from the pregnancies far from home. I can't blame him entirely. The mention of André de la Montagne sparked an old resentment in Daniel. Elena's father had never hidden his contempt for Daniel's lack of noble pedigree and the American approach to business. But to manipulate a situation this profoundly was beyond cruel. "You realize this is going to change everything," Daniel said. "I need to speak to a lawyer, figure out custody financial arrangements. And the children, how do we help them adjust?" Elena's face showed weariness, but also relief that Daniel was taking responsibility instead of pushing them away. "I've already spoken to a lawyer about my return to the States. I'm prepared to stay in New York if that's what it takes." He eyed her wary. "And your job?" She sighed. "I stepped back from my international projects. Right now, I'm focusing on philanthropic work. My father doesn't approve, but that doesn't matter anymore. My priority is the children." Daniel let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He recalled how they once dreamed of having children, raising them in a home full of love and mutual respect. That dream had crumbled. Now faced with reality, they had to figure out how to pick up the pieces and build something stable for 4 innocent lives. "How do we start?" he asked softly. Elena's lips curved into a sad smile. "Perhaps by letting them know we both love them, that we are both here for them. Everything else can come later. For tonight, let's just be there for them." As the evening wore on, Daniel felt guilt creeping in. The 4 children, his children, were clearly bewildered by this sudden introduction. While they bravely tried to interact with Daniel, he sensed their uncertainty. After all, in their young minds, he was a stranger who happened to share their eyes, face shape, and last name. He tried to be jovial with them, kneeling to their level, listening to their half-formed stories about Switzerland, about their school, about the snow-capped mountains they missed. But inside, he was consumed by a swirl of emotions. He'd missed their first steps, first words, birthdays, 6 years of precious moments. And then came another jolt. During a lull, Madeline quietly asked, "Is Hans coming too?" Daniel glanced at Elena. Confusion etched on his face. Elena's expression stiffened. "We'll talk about that later, sweetheart," she said hastily. Hands Daniel pressed. Elena hesitated, then cleared her throat. I've been seeing someone, a colleague from work. It's not serious, but the children know him. He was around as a friend." A sharp pang of jealousy, anger, and betrayal shot through Daniel. That was only natural. Eleanor was no longer his wife, and she had every right to date. But the thought that another man had been a figure in his children's lives, even if just tangentially, set his teeth on edge. He fought to keep his voice calm. "So he's been around the children," Elena nodded, looking away. "They like him, Daniel. He's been kind to them." Daniel swallowed the bitterness rising in his throat. "I see," Sebastian piped up. "Hans takes us sledding. He helped me make a birdhouse once." The image of another man, stepping into fatherly roles, stung Daniel deeply. Yet he forced a polite nod. "That's nice of him." Elena quickly changed the subject, offering the children a plate of mini pastries from a passing waiter. But Daniel's thoughts lingered on Hans. He wondered if Hans had become a paternal figure, if the children would look to him instead of Daniel. By the time the ball was winding down, Daniel had endured the well-meaning small talk of acquaintances who admired the adorable children, asking whose they were. He offered vague smiles and quick answers, uncertain how to handle such personal inquiries. Outside, the snowfall had intensified, blanketing the city in white. Daniel stood with the children under the glowing street lamps, waiting as a valet brought around 2 cars. He felt an unspoken tension with Elena by his side. They were 2 estranged individuals, forced back together by the existence of these 4 precious lives. "Where are you staying tonight?" he asked her. "At the Ritz, for now," she replied. "I didn't know how you'd react, so I didn't make longer-term arrangements." He nodded. "That's fine. Look, tomorrow I'd like to spend more time with them. Can we arrange that?" Elena studied him, relief softening her features. "Of course. They need to know their father." Daniel forced a tiny smile at the word father, still grappling with the weight of it. Then, as the children climbed into the waiting SUV, Daniel laid a gentle hand on Elena's arm. "Thank you for telling me, even if it's late." She gave him a somber nod. "And I'm sorry." In the hush of the swirling snow, Daniel watched as the vehicle pulled away. He stood there a long time, staring into the winter night, silently vowing that whatever happened next, he wouldn't abandon those children. No matter how painful the transition, they were his, and he was theirs. The following morning, Daniel woke in his penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. Sleep had eluded him for much of the night visions of 4 bright-eyed faces populating his restless dreams. He rose early, brewing a pot of strong coffee as he mulled over the next step. He called his mother Carol White, who lived in a quiet suburb in Connecticut. It was time she heard the news. When he told her she had 4 grandchildren, the coffee mug almost slipped from his hand as he heard her reaction. First she stammered in disbelief, then sobbed, then erupted in joy mingled with confusion and a tinge of anger at Eleanor's secrecy. Despite everything, Carol couldn't wait to meet them. Daniel also placed a call to James Harrington, who demanded an explanation. They arranged to meet in the Harrington and White boardroom that afternoon, once Daniel had a chance to visit with his newly discovered family. A text beeped on Daniel's phone just as he stepped into the hallway. "Elena, we're at the Central Park Zoo with the kids. Meet us here if you can." Daniel hurried to dress, donning a casual sweater and coat. The crisp winter air bit at his cheeks as he strode down the block, weaving past holiday shoppers and carriage horses. The sense of surreal anticipation made his heart pound. At the zoo's entrance, he found Elena and the children watching seals swim in a large tank. The children spotted him first, waving excitedly. His chest warmed at their enthusiasm. He approached with a smile. "Hey guys," Sebastian grabbed his hand. "Look at the seals, Papa." The casual use of Papa startled Daniel, but he squeezed the boy's hand in response, a lump forming in his throat. Elena noticed his reaction. "They adapt quickly," she murmured, eyes bright with unshed tears. They strolled along, admiring the polar bears and penguins, occasionally stopping to buy hot cocoa. Daniel tried to soak in every detail, how Madeline tugged on his sleeve to show him her favorite animals. How Thomas giggled when the penguins waddled, how Florence shyly stuck close to Elena, how Sebastian asked a million questions about everything. They were a family moving in a loose cluster, forging a tender sense of unity. Yet Daniel couldn't help noticing a shadow in Elena's gaze, as if she were keeping another secret. After a while, Sebastian raced ahead. "Papa, there's an ice sculpture over there." Elena and Daniel lagged behind, exchanging a look. "They're incredible," Daniel remarked. "Smart curious. I'm amazed at how they each have their own personality." Elena smiled. "You would have made a wonderful father, Daniel." He regarded her intently. "Is there anything else you haven't told me? Because right now I need the truth. Everything." She sighed, glancing away. "There is something else, but I wasn't sure how to bring it up. It's about Thomas. He's had some health issues since he was born prematurely. Alarm raced through Daniel. Health issues. Is he okay? He's mostly fine, Elena said quickly. But he has a minor heart condition. The doctors say it's manageable with medication and monitoring. He might need surgery in the future, but there's a good chance he won't. Daniel's face paled. My God, Elena, you should have told me. I'd have been there for him. She placed a hand on his arm. I know. This is what I regret most. I'm ready to set things right now. I've brought them here so we can live in New York for a while, see specialists if needed, and ensure he gets the best care. I'll bear any cost if you want. Daniel's response was immediate. No. We'll share it. He's my son, our son. I'll do whatever it takes to help him. Emotions swarmed in Eleanor's eyes. Relief mingled with sorrow. Thank you. Their conversation was cut short by the children's excited calls. They hurried over, trying to smile and laugh as if everything was normal. But for Daniel, each moment with the children was a reminder of what he'd missed and of the challenges to come. After the zoo, they decided to warm up at a nearby cafe, a cozy establishment known for its artisan pastries. The children devoured mini croissants while Elena sipped a cappuccino, and Daniel hovered protectively, noticing every detail about his new family members. Between bites of pastry, Florence hesitantly asked Papa, "Do you have a nice house?" Daniel chuckled softly. "I have an apartment. It's big enough for all of you if you ever want to visit." Madeline's face lit up. "Can we see it?" Eleanor shot Daniel a questioning glance. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" He took a moment before nodding. "Yes. I'd like them to see where I live. I have a spare room that can be turned into something for them." So it was decided. They gathered their things and took a quick taxi ride to Daniel's penthouse overlooking Central Park. The building's doorman, Mr. Bartholomew, nearly dropped his cap upon seeing Daniel leading 4 children by the hand. "Elena. Kids?" "This is home," Daniel said, opening his front door. The foyer was sleek and modern, perhaps too sterile for children's tastes. Sebastian's eyes widened at the floor-to-ceiling windows, while Madeline squealed with delight at the view of the snowy treetops and distant skyscrapers. They spread out, exploring. Elena followed them, pointing out paintings and artifacts Daniel had collected. Her gaze stopped on a photo of Daniel's parents. "Your mother will be ecstatic," she said. "She's already invited all of you to spend Christmas in Connecticut," Daniel replied. A flicker of fear touched Elena's face. "It might be overwhelming to meet your entire family so soon." He shrugged gently. "They're the children's family too, Elena. We can take it slow. I just want them to feel welcomed." She nodded, watching Thomas run giggling across the living room's polished floor. They deserve a big family Christmas. They've never really had that. A warm feeling grew in Daniel's chest. Maybe despite the heartbreak, they could form a family dynamic, if not as husband and wife, then at least as coring co-parents. Suddenly, Eleanor's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her face paling. She excused herself, stepping into the hallway. Daniel lingered, an uneasy feeling creeping over him. A few minutes later, Elena returned, face ashen. "What's wrong?" he asked. "It's Hans," she said, voice tight. "He's in New York. He wants to see me and the children." Daniel felt a sudden wave of protectiveness, almost territorial. "He has no claim on them. I'm their father." Eleanor placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's not that simple. The kids know him. They care for him." "But I'm here now," Daniel insisted, trying to quell the anger. I won't just stand by while some stranger plays father." She looked torn. "I understand. I'll talk to him. Just please don't make this more complicated than it has to be." Daniel exhaled, controlling his temper. "Fine. But I want to be present for any meeting. The children need stability, not confusion." Elena nodded, and the tension in her shoulders seemed to ease. But the mere prospect of Hans stepping into the picture threatened to upend the fragile dynamic Daniel and Elena were beginning to forge. Over the next few days, Daniel spent every spare moment with his children. He took them to the Museum of Natural History, where they marveled at dinosaur skeletons and celestial exhibits. He showed them Rockefeller Center's towering Christmas tree, letting them watch the ice skaters gliding beneath twinkling lights. Those days were some of the happiest Daniel had experienced in a long time, yet a lingering worry about Hans hovered in the back of his mind. Would Hans try to disrupt his reconnection with the children? One afternoon, while Elena and the children were napping in their suite at the Ritz, Daniel went to his office to meet James Harrington. Sitting in the sleek boardroom with glass walls overlooking Manhattan, Daniel braced for James's barrage of questions, so James began leaning forward. 4 kids. Daniel. You have no idea the shockwaves this is causing among our investors and clients. They're all calling me asking if there's some scandal or if we've been hiding something. Daniel pinched the bridge of his nose. I didn't know, James. Believe me, this was as much a surprise to me as it was to the world. James studied him intently. Do you believe Elena's story? Daniel nodded slowly. Yes. She's done a DNA test already. Or at least she's offered it. I believe her. They have my eyes, for God's sake. James exhaled. All right. So how are we handling this from a PR standpoint? Daniel thought for a moment. We release a brief statement saying I've recently become aware of my children that I intend to fulfill all my responsibilities as a father, and that the details remain private. That should suffice. I don't want to exploit my kids' private lives. James agreed. But be aware the media might spin it. Elena was high profile in the finance world too. They'll probably dig up old dirt. Daniel nodded, crossing his arms. Let them dig. I just care about the kids right now. They're my top priority. James softened, offering Daniel a supportive smile. You've always wanted a family, man. Maybe this is your chance. Just be careful with Elena. She's unpredictable. Daniel gave a mirthless chuckle. Trust me, I know. After the meeting, Daniel returned to the Ritz, a sense of determination fueling him. He wanted to talk to Elena about officially moving back to the US with the children. But when he arrived, he found her in tears in the lounge. She looked up, eyes puffy. Hans. He confronted me. He demanded to see the children. He's threatening legal action, claiming he's acted as a de facto parent. Daniel's blood ran cold. He has no legal claim. He's not their father. Elena sniffed, wiping her cheeks. He's not listed on any birth certificates, of course, but he's threatening to tell the tabloids about everything about how I hid the children from you, about the details of our finances. He wants money, Daniel. Daniel ground his teeth. So he's blackmailing you. She nodded miserably. I broke things off with him as soon as I decided to come to New York. He didn't take it well. Now he's furious. Rage coursed through Daniel, but he forced himself to remain calm. We'll handle it. I'll talk to my lawyers, and we'll put a stop to his threats. The children won't be used as pawns. Eleanor looked at him with gratitude. I'm sorry, Daniel. It seems every time you try to fix things, I bring another complication. He gently took her hand. We'll get through it. Together. For the kids. That evening, an unexpected phone call shattered the fragile calm. Hans called Daniel directly. His tone was aggressive, laced with bitterness. "You think you can just waltz back into Elena's life and claim those children?" Hans spat. "I've been the one helping them for years." Daniel clenched his jaw. "They're my children, Hans. My blood." Hans laughed harshly. "Your blood, sure. But I was there when Eleanor needed help. If you had any decency, you'd let me at least see them." Daniel paused, wrestling with the primal urge to tell Hans to stay away forever. But he also recognized that the children knew Hans. Forcing them to lose him abruptly might be traumatic. "We can discuss a supervised meeting," Daniel conceded. "But if you try anything, any attempt at blackmail, I'll see you in court." Hans scoffed. "You think your money and power can scare me?" Elena's father tried that. He didn't succeed. Daniel ended the call, fury boiling in his veins. Elena, who stood nearby, watched him with anxious eyes. "We'll do a supervised meeting," he told her. "It might help the children's transition if they can say goodbye or set boundaries. But he's not going to threaten us anymore." She nodded, tears of relief shining. "Thank you for handling this." They set the meeting for the next day in the presence of lawyers at a neutral law office. The children arrived with Elena subdued and confused. Hans was already there, face pinched with anger. When the children ran to greet him, Daniel's stomach twisted. Hans cast a smug glance Daniel's way, as if to say, "See, they're mine in spirit." But Sebastian, after hugging Hans briefly, hurried to Daniel's side. "Papa, are you okay?" Daniel's heart soared at the simple question the child's concern for him. "I'm fine, buddy," he murmured, tousling Sebastian's hair. The negotiations that followed were tense. Hans wanted continued contact, threatening to leak scandalous information. Eleanor confessed that Hans had personal emails and financial records that could be damaging if taken out of context. Daniel's lawyer threatened Hans with a defamation suit if he went public. Finally, they reached a precarious agreement. Hans would receive a severance of sorts, a lump sum from Elena's personal funds, and would agree to no future contact with the children unless they requested it themselves once they were of age. It wasn't an ideal solution, but it would stave off immediate scandal and harassment. The children seemed unsettled as Hans gave them a final hug. Thomas clung to him for a moment, tears glistening in his eyes. Daniel's chest tightened at the sight, but he tried to remain stoic. Hans left abruptly, slamming the door behind him. Outside the office, Eleanor knelt to comfort the children, tears streaming down her cheeks. Daniel joined them, feeling the weight of these events pressing down on their small shoulders. In that moment, he promised himself he would never let them feel abandoned again. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. Elena and the children moved into a rented townhouse near Daniel's apartment. Daniel spent his weekends showing them American traditions, like decorating a Christmas tree, baking cookies, and practicing English holiday carols. The day finally came for the children to meet Carol White, their grandmother in Connecticut. Despite the tension and swirling emotions, the meeting was a joyous occasion. Carol wept openly as she embraced each of her grandchildren, scolding Elena only briefly for keeping them hidden for so long. Christmas morning found them all gathered in Carol's cozy living room. Snow fell softly outside. The children squealed over presents, and Elena found herself welcomed warmly, surprisingly so, by Carol's motherly grace. Daniel, dressed in a comfy sweater, took time to reflect on how drastically his life had changed in mere weeks. He now had the family he had once dreamed about, though not in the way he'd imagined. Eleanor and Daniel still had much to resolve. Their romantic relationship remained uncertain. Old wounds and betrayals lingered, but so did a lingering thread of love. They'd begun counseling, determined to co-parent effectively. Whether or not they would reconcile as a couple remained to be seen. One late night after the children had gone to bed, Daniel and Elena sat on his penthouse balcony. The city lights twinkled below the hush of snow, making the moment feel magical. Elena leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder. "Do you think we could ever be a family again?" she asked. Daniel slipped an arm around her, 1,000 thoughts flooding his mind. "I think we already are a family," he said softly. "Maybe not the conventional kind, but we'll figure it out." Elena gazed at him, a small smile curving her lips.